Thursday marks 3 years since Superstorm Sandy made landfall. The disaster left millions in the dark in places like New York and New Jersey shore. Heat and light did not return in some cases for nearly 2 weeks. But what if terrorists go after our power grids? Emmy and Peabody Award winner Ted Koppel investigated. His new book is called Lights Out. We're pleased to welcome him to Studio 57. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Charlie. How are you?
Good morning. Good to see you here.
Good morning. Good morning. I spend every morning with you guys. The three of you in a bowl of muesli. That's how I start my day.
In a bowl of what?
There's no better way.
Muesli.
Yes. He prefers a high fiber breakfast, is what he's telling us.
That keeps you regular.
That keeps it. That's it.
Now let's start with the book.
Yes.
Are we now talking about something? It's not a question of whether, but when.
That's exactly the way that the four-star general who commands CENTCOM put it. He said it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. The Chinese and the Russians already have essentially cyber time bombs inside our power grid. They probably won't use them because we and the Chinese and we and the Russians have so many interconnecting relationships. But if you start thinking about the Iranians and the North Koreans and groups like ISIS, they are all developing the same kind of capability, and they wouldn't be restrained the same way that the Chinese and the Russians.
You know what's so frustrating about the book? Because as you point out, it's not a question of if, but when, that we're not prepared. Reading your book, it was very frightening to me how little prepared we are.
What scares me, Gail, is the fact that people in government, I mean, Leon Panetta, when he was Secretary of Defense, spoke about a cyber Pearl Harbor. The president, twice in State of the Union addresses, has warned about this kind of thing happening. When you ask, however, what the government's preparations are for the public in the event that something like this were to transpire, and we would be potentially tens of millions of people without electricity for months at a time.
So are they saying they don't view it urgently?
What I'm saying is there's no plan. There are plans for hurricanes, there are plans for snowstorms, there are plans for earthquakes. There is no plan for a cyber attack that would be infinitely longer in duration and more widespread than any of those natural disasters.
You went and interviewed, you sat down with the head of Homeland Security,
I did.
Secretary Johnson. What did he say when you asked him about the plan? The lack of one.
He pointed up at a bunch of white binders in his office and he said, I'm sure there's a plan out there somewhere. And I said, well, don't you think it would be smart to get that plan out to the public before there is a massive break in electrical power? And he said, look, I mean, this is a relatively simple thing. You need a radio, you need a battery-powered radio. My question is, when the power goes out, what are we going to tell people on those battery-powered
You even used the word that he got a little prickly.
He did get a little prickly, yeah.
Ted, I just want to say, we did also reach out to DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and we got a full page of details about what they would do in the case of an attack. And they said, you know, how they'd coordinate with FEMA and local officials, that they're working with the private sector for more resources in support. I think to your point, if the lights went out, it's more than just the lights. Explain what could actually happen to people if there's a massive cyber attack.
Well, in a place like Manhattan, for example, if the power goes out, you know how the fire department and the police spend the first couple of days? Getting people out of stalled elevators. You're talking about a community of, what, 8 million people? The food in a place like Manhattan would run out in a couple of days. New York State has several million MREs, meals ready to eat. But when you take several million and you divide it by 8 million, you're talking about maybe a 2 or 3 day food supply. What happens on day 4? What happens on day 10?
Who in this country is prepared?
Well, the Mormons are prepared. I spent 3 days out in Salt Lake City with leaders of the Mormon Church, and they showed me everything. Well, I don't know if they showed me everything they got, but they showed me a great deal. They are extraordinarily well prepared, not for a cyber attack. Mormons, after all, are people who have been driven from pillar to post for 200 years in this country. They have made a culture of preparing for disaster. They're ready for it. Most of the rest of us are not.
But you point out in your book that for the first time, the government needs to worry about.
Do you ever let this guy ask a question?
No, but that's all right.
Come on, Gail.
That's all right.
Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm teasing you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Gail reads. Gail reads.
No, Gail
reads
and I
your
were talking.
entire book,
I
page to
know.
page. Look at her notes.
I know.
She reads the entire
Go
book.
ahead, Gail. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that.
How long are you staying here?
How long do you,
I was really looking forward to talking to you, Ted Koppel. I was so excited about the book. Okay, but let me just ask you this. Because you said for the first time the government needs to worry about the internet being a weapon of mass destruction.
Absolutely.
But you also say, how do you prepare for something when you don't know where and when it could come from? Because it could come from anywhere.
What I'm suggesting is we need to prepare for the consequences of a cyber attack. It's not enough just to say, yes, we know it's going to happen. We don't know where, we don't know when, we don't know exactly how many people are going to be affected. We are not ready. Tom Ridge, who was the first Secretary of Homeland Security, said to me, you know, we are not a preemptive society. We react to events. If you think about everything we did in the wake of 9/11, we spent $3 trillion on 2 wars.
But Ted, you've already said that Leon Panetta, in his Senate confirmation hearings, talked about the next Pearl Harbor will be a cyber attack. And you've talked about the fact that the president's mentioned it. You would think that that alone would create some sense of urgency.
I think people are a little bit worried about preparing the American public for something that they are not 100% sure is going to happen. My sense of it, though, is we're better off preparing. I mean, let's say we prepare for something that doesn't happen. Then we will at least be prepared for any other disaster that comes along. But I must tell you, after spending almost 2 years on this, I'm convinced that at some point or another, it's going to happen.
Why did you take this on?
And Sandy's an indication of the
Why did you look at this? Is there a brief answer to that question?
The only brief answer is I heard some of those warnings. I picked up the phone. I called Homeland Security. I called FEMA. I called the Red Cross. I got stuck in 3 different phone trees.
Yeah. Do you miss being on TV, Ted? Just listening to your voice, I think, God, I miss you, Ted Koppel, on
well,
TV.
you're very
Do you
sweet.
miss it? Do you miss the day-to-day?
Not terribly, no.
No?
In fact, not the day-to-day, not at all.
Okay.
No.
Don't worry about me talking to Ted. We're doing an hour, then we're doing a big thing at a conference here in New York.
I will give Charlie some questions, so he'll be ready for you.
That'll be great.
Ted Koppel, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Lights Out goes on sale today.